Never focus on past blame. Always focus on future responsibility. So this is one of our 12 laws. Yeah, so it's law number 7 of our 12 laws. Never focus on past blame, always focus on future responsibility. So you're outside, you're shooting hoops with your friends, right? You got 2-on-2, and something happens. You go up and you're trying to play defense, and the other team shoots and they score, and they are now winning. And your team member looks over at you and says, "Hey, you should have been holding that guy." And this is an example of past blame. Something has gone wrong in your book or in that person's book. The other team has scored, and now this person is looking for someone to blame. So they point at you. Now, is it fun? What do you think? Is it fun to play with someone who acts that way in professional sports? Whatever your thing is, you can be in the theater and maybe the performance doesn't sell well or get a big applause, and then your co-actor says, "Ah, you should have been on your mark. You didn't do this and that," and they point out a mistake that you made. Does that feel good to be around someone like that? Not at all. And you work with them, don't you? You work with them in the office, right, in the fields. These are the people where whenever something doesn't go their way, they're very quick to put the blame on you. But not only is it unpleasant to be around someone that blames, it's unpleasant to uh, be around someone that blames themselves too much. And maybe you've experienced that. Is if you have someone who is too self-deprecating, and they're too much like, "Oh, that's my fault. I'm so sorry. I did that wrong." And it's too much of that, then you feel uncomfortable again, but in a different way. Now you just feel like maybe this person, something's wrong with them. Maybe they have mental health issues. I don't want to be constantly reassuring them. You feel obligated to like make them feel better all the time. No, Karen, it's not your fault. No, Jessica, calm down. We share the blame, right? So this blame thing is a very important concept to understand how to get the proper context with blame, to understand how to distribute blame in a balanced fashion is very important, because without it, you are in mental illness. People who blame others too much are being too narcissistic, and people who blame themselves too much are going to sink into depression, shame, low self-worth. So how do we strike that balance with this concept of blame? Well, we have to have the right viewpoint around it. The reason why you might find yourself as someone who blames others too much or blames themselves too much, or a little combination of both, is because in childhood, when you should have been able to form your higher concepts of life, you were trying to survive. And you might have been trying to survive in an environment where you had a parent that blamed you when things went wrong. In fact, if you were the scapegoat of the house, you could get blamed for even your parents having problems in their marriage. You could get blamed for things that definitely have nothing to do with you as the scapegoat in the house. Or maybe you weren't the scapegoat, but you saw your parents blaming certain other kids for certain things, or blaming each other for things. Or maybe you had a parent that self-blamed and they always blame themselves. And so you picked that up and thought, okay, I guess that's the way to be altruistic. That's the way to be a good person. But that stunted your ability to formulate the higher concepts and really sound those down in your mind. So let's get that fixed right now. Take a moment and just meditate on this concept. Is there one person that is to blame for every situation? Is there one person that is to blame? Is it always either your fault or the other person's fault? Is that how the universe works? Just think about that for a moment. As you contemplate that, you might be coming to a conclusion that life is maybe a little bit more complicated than just having one person to blame, right? Life is more nuanced, which means that each situation is different. In most cases, there's multiple factors and parties to blame for everything. Let me give this to you again. In most cases in life, in most situations, there are multiple parties and factors to blame for whatever happens. So it's too complicated to try to sum up the situation as your fault or all my fault. That would be taking child level thinking and trying to apply it as an adult in the real world. It's not going to serve us well. If we blame ourselves too much, our mental health will deplete. If we blame others too much, then we're going to be narcissistic and we're going to deplete the mental health of others. So we have to find the way to strike the proper balance. First is to change the beliefs. In most cases, there is not just one party to blame for a situation. In most cases, there are multiple factors and multiple parties to blame. And we'll get into some of the details of this because I know there's exceptions to all of these things. But you have to go with me so that you can get out of this one trauma that you're talking about and get into the entire universe and how it works. Because in the entire universe, it's not as simple as just, bam, we blame someone. So first of all, should we outwardly tell someone when we do think that they're to blame, even if we're balanced enough to see that they're partially to blame? Should we tell people that? Generally, no. Generally, it would be rude and lacking social calibration to tell someone that they are to blame or why they are to blame. The definition of blame in the dictionary is to criticize, to reprimand, to reprove. Does that sound like something that you should be doing on a regular basis? No, because that's judgmental. And we shouldn't be walking around judging everyone. Actually, what we need to practice is more forgiveness, right? What's good and well socially calibrated is knowing the art of helping other people to save face. Knowing the art of helping other people to save face, right? You understand that concept of saving face? It's making sure that someone does not feel shamed by a situation. Making sure someone does not feel shamed by the situation. So when you're good at the art of saving face, now you're playing basketball, and then the other person maybe on your team didn't play great defense, so the other team scored, but you say to your partner, hey, no problem, we'll get him next time. Helping him to save face. You may even go as far as to say, oh, you know what? I think that might have been my bad. Why would you do that? Because you're helping that other person to save face. This is good social calibration. If you're seeing this situation with balance, you will realize it cannot be totally your partner's fault because there was another player on the field or the court, and that player was going hard against your partner and evaded your partner. And so it's got to be somewhat that other player's fault that you got scored on since the other player made the score. Does that make sense? So how ridiculous to blame your teammate for the actions of the opponent. But yeah, we see this all the time. And you do it to yourself. You leave your car doors unlocked, someone robs you, and you go, I'm so stupid. Simmer down on that self-blame. There are multiple factors to blame in every situation. Yes, you contributed to the vulnerability and the possibility by not locking your car door. That's true. But come on, you didn't rob your car. If you did, we wouldn't have a problem. The problem is another person was wicked and evil, and they robbed your car. That carries the majority of the weight of responsibility, right? So it would be dumb to just blame yourself. It would also be foolish to just blame everyone else. Oh, these people, oh. Well, you know, there's that little 10% there where you could have locked your car door, right? You see how we balance this? We recognize there are multiple factors involved in the scenario in every situation. So instead of trying to find who we blame, we should focus on what we can control because all blame is in the past. Again, instead of focusing on blame, because all blame is in the past, we should focus on what we can control. And we'll get to that. But let me first acknowledge there are situations where we need to learn to blame others more. Like, for instance, when there's no relationship that needs to be preserved by the politeness of letting someone save face, when there's no one whose mental health we need to protect outside of our own, but there has been a heinous crime against us, such as being assaulted, harmed, or mistreated, then you need to learn to place the burden of responsibility where it belongs and stop victim blaming. Saying to yourself, I'm so stupid. I was wrong. I shouldn't have gone out that night. I shouldn't have worn what I wore. I shouldn't have talked to those people. I should. There's a 10% perhaps of something that you could have done differently. Maybe, yes. But come on. When someone commits a crime against you, then clearly they're bearing the majority of the responsibility because they actively made that happen. And a lot of times it could have been motivated by bad intentions. So we have to understand how to properly distribute this blame situation. And so, number one, everything has multiple factors involved. It's not as simple as just finding someone to point the finger at, including yourself. If we point the finger at ourselves, it's cognitive distortion, which is mental illness. If you point the finger at someone else, it's equally cognitive distortion and mentally ill, but now you could cause them mental illness. And also, it's a narcissistic thing to do. Hopefully, you're following me here. The ego is something that is very fragile, but we need it. The ego, the perception of the self, it's the way you see yourself. It's fragile. It's very easy for your ego to crack, get crushed, slip, fall, however you want to picture it. It's very easy for something to go wrong with your ego, for you to get hurt. Someone says one thing, you're ugly. Your ego can, really quickly. You're dumb. You're not talented. You're not good enough, right? And we live in a world with all of that negativity surrounding us, so much adversity. So we need to learn to protect our own ego and protect the ego of others. We need to learn to protect our own ego equally as protecting the ego of others. This is why there is a double standard for how you interact with people in terms of what you say and how you interact with yourself in terms of what you think. Follow me. There is a double standard because you need to protect their ego. You don't walk up to people and tell them how they were wrong. Generally, that would be something you avoid, unless you are a paid judge, coach, you understand. Generally, that's something you avoid. You don't walk up to people and tell them how they're wrong, even when it's your job to do so. You're very careful in the way you put it. Use skill and technique in the way that you approach it. Why? Because we need to protect the ego of others. Because we don't want to make them slip into shame and mental illness. And that shows love and care, right? And so that politeness is social calibration, and that's what allows us to be able to work with other people. It is like the oil or the grease between the gears so that they don't grind and there's not too much friction. That's your ability to walk into situations and not place the blame on others, and sometimes even use tactically an outward self-blame, where you'll take responsibility for something when it wasn't necessary. This is tactical. So this is something you're doing as a tactic in order to protect their ego. And so you'll walk up to a person where something has just gone wrong, like your teammate has made a mistake or your coworker maybe feels bad, and you say something like, hey, no worries there. Actually, I could have, blah, blah, blah. And you're taking blame on yourself. But wait a second, aren't we not supposed to self-blame? We're doing this tactically, meaning with purpose and strategy to protect the ego of the other person. It is an expression of love. It is polite. It is skillful. And we're doing it because it creates oil. All of us love being around a person, especially a leader, that's quick to take responsibility. So understand there's a balanced approach to being able to say to people, hey, my fault. Be quick to say that to other people. But understand, it is a double standard because how you're talking to them is not how you talk to yourself on the inside. So we'll be quick to say, hey, that's my fault, buddy. But you don't actually go in your dark room and go, that's my fault. It's my fault. It's your fault, Roman. You did it wrong. You understand? Because that's going to bring me back to mental illness. I have to protect my ego too. So I protect theirs and say, hey, that's probably my fault too. Hey, I bear some responsibility there, right? And then we go alone and we say, I did the best I could. Does that make sense? How we balance that? What I'm doing here is ego protection. The ego is fragile. So I cannot go self-blame. Oh, that happened because of me. It's my fault. Oh, this is me. You don't do that. The way you think to yourself is not exactly the same to the way you speak outwardly to other people. So with them, you're patting their ego. Hey, no problem. Hey, it's no big deal. You might even take responsibility. For yourself, you're looking at the nuance of the situation. That's not all my fault. I'm not going to take all the responsibility for that. You protect your ego. And this keeps you out of mental illness, and you're also being careful for other people's mental well-being. Hopefully that makes sense to you. That's being well socially calibrated, but also mentally healthy. We do not need to blame ourselves. We need to understand that things are nuanced. And a lot of times, it really is not our fault, especially when there is a heinous crime against us, where we were attacked or assaulted in some way. A lot of times people feel like blaming themselves will be good because they think that feeling bad about themselves will be a motivator. Let's change the belief. Does feeling bad about yourself actually motivate you? The answer is no, not most of the time. 85% of the time, we actually feel more motivated when we feel good about ourselves. When someone says, hey, you're really good at that, you feel like doing that more. Then when they say, you know what, you're really terrible at this. Like imagine your husband coming in and saying, you're terrible at keeping the kitchen clean. Does that make you want to clean up the kitchen? Does that motivate you to start scrubbing a floor? It's just your husband coming in telling you how terrible you are at it? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Demotivated, right? But on the other hand, if he or another family member were to say, man, you know what? You are on the ball. I can't believe how well you keep this house clean. You're underappreciated. Now what? It's kind of motivating. Why? Because we're more motivated more consistently by the positive. When we are reinforced in a positive way, it actually helps us to feel positive chemicals around the situation, dopamine, oxytocin, and we want to do it more. The negative chemicals trying to induce adrenaline, induce cortisol, only works in small percentages of the time. So only for emergencies should you use the drill sergeant routine on yourself. Be kind to yourself and make sure that you don't try to rely on feeling bad as a motivator. On the inverse, fearing feeling shame and fearing feeling bad is motivating. But I would prefer you use, instead of fear as your motivator, you use love of self, and focus on your loving purpose and what you're trying to accomplish. So, how do we focus on future responsibility? Which is what we're supposed to be focusing on instead of past blame. Imagine your child knocks the milk on the floor. So, is past blame helpful? What did you do? How did that help the child? Running in there, That was you. You did it. How is that helping the child? It's too much emphasis on the past. Focusing on past blame doesn't help you. Imagine you failed one of your courses that you're taking. Going into, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm so dumb. How's that helping you? It's not. Saying, oh, the professor was so unfair. He shouldn't have gave us those extra assignments. How is that helping you? It's not. So we got to get off of the past blame and get into future responsibility. The past has some value, and that's extracting lessons. So a better approach for the child is just to extract the lessons from the past. Hey, uh-oh, that's okay. What can we learn from this situation? What does he learn from that? Well, now his mind is open to actually learn. Oh, yeah, maybe I could learn something from what happened here. Well, I guess I don't have to set the glass on the edge of the counter where you can start to problem solve and troubleshoot the situation. That's what we want our child to be. We want to teach them to think. And so we need to do the same thing when we're problem solving with our team at work. It's not you shouldn't have did this, Johnny. No, it's what can we learn? What can we learn? It didn't go well last quarter. We lost this, but what can we learn from it? That's the only thing that's good from the past, and let's move on. Like quick, it's just a quick thing. Like, oh, what can we learn? Okay, it's a quick thing. Don't do this anymore. Okay, great. Now focus on future responsibility. Responsibility is all about who's going to do what. That's what responsibility is about. Future responsibility is focusing on what you can do in the future, not what you should have done. That's past blame. Stop that. We're here. Future responsibility. I failed my class. Future responsibility. What can I do? What can I do? This is meditation. Asking yourself a question and you allow the conscious mind to work on it. And the conscious mind starts to analyze and come up with scenarios. You could ask the teacher for an extension. You could try to retake the test. You could try to work hard, get the money, and repurchase the course again. You could go to summer school and you start thinking of things you could do, things you can do, things you can do. And you know what's going to happen? Well, by God, you might actually be successful. You might actually solve problems. You might actually be resilient. The only thing that's worth focusing on is future responsibility. The next time you go to pour milk, I want you to use two hands. Future responsibility. No, I'm not mad about this. The next time, I just want you to use two hands when you're pouring the milk. It's just that simple. Future responsibility. Does that make sense? Good. In everything, always. That's where the majority of your focus has got to go. Like 90% of your thinking, future responsibility. The responsibility is associated with the power. Have you heard that phrase? With great power comes great responsibility. As far as I know, that actually comes from Spider-Man, Stan Lee, which is kind of sad because it's a really good concept that it came from a comic book. But it's true. With great power comes great responsibility. There's a correlation between power and responsibility. The correlation is this. Wherever there is responsibility, there is power. Wherever there is power, there is responsibility. If you have power in something, then you naturally, universally, by law, have responsibility in that area. If you got the power over it, then you've got the responsibility over it. But if it's something that you don't have power over, then you don't have any responsibility over it. That's why we have to let go of the past, because we no longer have power over that anymore, over what happened. There's no power. I can't do anything to change the past. So therefore, there's no responsibility. It's done. It's done. There's no reason for me to dwell on everything that happened in the past that I did wrong. I don't have any further responsibility. I can learn lessons. I can take accountability and say, that's my fault. That's fine, but there's nothing to learn. Focus has got to be on what can I do in the future? How am I going to handle this moving forward? That's it. Future responsibility. There's a direct correlation. So analyze the situations that are stressing you out, a lot of them being from the past, and recognize if you actually have control over those situations or not. If you have no power, then there is no responsibility. Let it go. It's not your business. With no power, there's no responsibility. It's not your business. If you can't control something, then there's no power. If there's no power, then there's no responsibility. There's nothing to think about when it's something you can't control. Well, I hated how these people, do you control these people? Well, then there's no responsibility. Let it go. Well, but the system is built. You don't understand the system. It's holding us down because it's a multi-structural, systematic. Do you control the system? If you have no power over it, you have no responsibility. Let it go. Focus on what you can do in the future. So that's the only thing we need to worry about. Is that pretty clear? All blame is about the past. So there's no point in worrying about who to blame. It's too nuanced anyway. Situations are complicated. There's all these factors involved in blame. What's that going to do for us? The only thing that we can control is what we do moving forward. We control us. And since we control us, we have responsibility for ourselves, for what we're going to do, what we're going to accomplish, and caring for ourselves, accomplishing our purpose. So that's got to be where our focus is. The aspects of the future that you can control, where you have the influence, that's where you focus. Can you control everything in your future? Of course not. Of course not. We can't control everything in our future. So should we focus on everything? No. Just focus on the part that you control. Narrow lane, right? Like the horses that got the blinders on the side, that keeps them focused on moving forward. Otherwise, they get distracted by other things and they get thrown off course. Put your blinders on, right? So that you can focus on the course ahead. My purpose, the thing that I came to do. I want to help people. I want to be a preacher. I want to be a teacher. I want to be a caretaker. I want to be an artist. I want to be a blogger. I want to, right, show up better for my family. I want to, right? You focus here on your lane of what you control, and it becomes like a superpower. You actually become seemingly more powerful because there's nothing more powerful than being responsible, because of that correlation. And so be highly responsible for your future. Take it under control, and you appear to be a powerful person. And everyone will say, how do you do it? How do you just accomplish whatever you want to accomplish? How are you so resilient? And then you can say, law number 7, never focus on past blame. Always focus on future responsibility.